And good evening, everyone. Happy New Year, and welcome to the first Shaken Not Heard of 2022. I am your host, Elliot Serrano. That there's my co-host, Dave Pino. How you doing, Dave?
All right. How about you? Happy New Year.
Oh man, is it really though? Is it really Happy New Year?
Yeah.
I mean, freaking first Betty White, 2021 takes her out before we could. And then what does 2022 hit us with? Bob Saget.
Yeah.
Bob Saget's gone. It's like, man, it's like the carnage doesn't end. It just keeps going and going. And he
Don't forget Sidney Poitier too. That's another big loss.
Yep, Sidney Poitier, and there were folk. Who was so they were saying it was Betty White, Sidney Poitier, and Bob Saget, because they always die in threes, right? They always go in threes.
When did Betty White die?
Right, was it right before the new year? Right?
Didn't you say? I thought the rule of three, it's like within just like a few days of one another.
Yeah.
So maybe this will start a new one. Hopefully not, but maybe.
So you're like, no, we're doing another one.
I don't want to will anything into existence, but it's possible.
Pretty bloodthirsty, aren't you, Dave?
Yeah.
Anyway, but yeah. So hey, thanks, folks who are tuned in. This is the first Shaken Not Heard of 2022. Took a little bitty break before we got into starting again. We finished all the movies last year, and the discussion was, will Shaken Not Heard continue now that we have no movies? Well, of course, yes. We've already been talking about the topics that we're going to cover in 2022. Today's one that we've touched on from time to time throughout the previous year, and but there are plenty more to come. Good evening, Lehman. Good evening, Susan. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. Thanks for being with us today in the new year. Really appreciate it. No movies, so that means no questions about if anything is faithful to the book. I guess, but my question to you, Dave, if at all appropriate, what are you drinking tonight, if anything? Or is this? Are you doing a dry January?
No, not for me. I am actually making use of a Christmas gift from my brother and sister-in-law, which I thought is appropriate because of the blood of Kali. In one of the Indiana Jones films we'll discuss. This is Blood Orange Cello. If you ever had limoncello before, which is a really delicious, strong lemon liqueur. This is the same idea, but made with blood orange. It's from a little Italian market locally in Forest Park called Gaetano's, and everything there is made in house. So this is made there. I don't know how long it takes them to make all these delicious liqueurs, but they're all amazing. They've got a pistachio one, an almond one, limoncello, of course, and this is like right up my alley. So it's delicious.
It looks good. Beth agrees. It sounds good too. That reminds me of one of my favorite memes that would go around last month, which was a picture of Mola Ram. And the meme went, "Last Christmas I gave you my heart. You shouted Kali Ma and it burst into flames." So, Kali Ma, Shakti De. So yeah. Anywho, so yeah, we're going to talk a bit about that. And tonight's discussion is, as you saw at the top of the show in the credits, is the Indiana Jones James Bond connection, which there are many of. And when I said we were going to talk about this, one of the friends of the show and somewhat regular, and I think you know, he's going to become as much of a regular on this show as I am on his show, Caffeinated Comics. Let's bring into the Shaken Not Heard virtual studio, John Clark. John, how you doing?
All right. I am usually not the person to wear stupid outfits.
But no,
I do own all of this. So this is probably the only time that I can bring it out.
Yeah.
How are you guys?
I'm good. How are you?
All right.
It's funny because one of the first times John and I hung out, it was at a signing. I want to say it was a Mike Mignola signing at All Yeah Comics.
Yes. I think it was around Christmas.
Around Christmas. And you, John, for those who are listening on the podcast, you can't see, you know, as we're talking on screen here. John showed up wearing a leather jacket, which I instantly recognized as an authentic Indiana Jones jacket. I mean, you can a lot of folks will wear bomber jackets in the type and confuse them for Indy Jones. Now, the Indiana Jones jackets have very specific characteristics, and I could see it on John right then. And I was like, son of a bitch. The guy owns the actual jacket, and it's a good thing I'm so much taller and heftier than you, because that evening I probably would have mugged you for it.
Yeah, the lining's already ruined. I got this in 2007, so it's naturally weathered because I've worn this in the streets of New York and Chicago through many a winter and too many summers because it's really too warm for summer. But Indiana Jones wears it all over the world all the time.
No matter how cold or how hot, the dude wears it in the sweltering jungles, which really makes no sense. I really do feel for Harrison Ford having to wear that stuff like on location. And you've also got a fedora. Is that
the official? Yeah, it's actually huge because they went through a lot of fedoras and they went through this one, and this gives me a perfect excuse to take it off and feel less like an idiot. But it's a little too tall and the brim is a little too wide to be, you know, like a classic Bogart fedora, and that's kind of what makes it iconic.
Yeah, I will go to a few Indiana Jones cosplay Facebook pages, and they'll have like entire sections devoted just to how you shape the hat. You know, what you do with the bash and the crown and all that stuff. And I have an older Indy fedora from Stetson that I could probably reshape. It's too big for my head right now. Like you said, it's kind of large, but it's totally lost its shape over the years. Then I bought another one that's more of a crushable type, but it's not, as some nerds would call, screen accurate.
Yeah, see, this is, I don't know if it's a Stetson, but if you see, it's got the Indiana Jones crest inside, which means I probably paid double what I should have.
Woulda, coulda, shoulda, but still.
But you know, when the fedoras came back, all the hipsters had the really, really tiny fedoras, and nothing says Indiana Jones less than a fedora that's the wrong size.
That's too big for your head, and shaped all funny, and looked like you ran under a waterfall wearing it. Something.
Yes.
Like I have since gone and purchased. I got my own Indiana Jones jacket. I got my own one from Wested, the original creators of the jacket for the films. I got the Last Crusade version because there are different versions for the different movies. I have a fedora. I bought a shirt. My problem is I'm just a little too hefty to properly show I don't have Indy bod. I have more of the rolling boulder. I mean, I could probably do that a bit.
You're more of a Sala.
I'm more of a Sala. Even Sala. I mean, Sala's square. I'm very pear-shaped. So.
As long as it's a jacket that can zip up, no one has to know. It's like at one of the C2E2s, I bought a Star Trek Next Generation hoodie, but it doesn't have the Starfleet symbol on it. So really, when people see it, it's a red hoodie that has black shoulders. And only I know how much of a geek I am.
You're being subtle about it. You're being
I try to go under the radar and seem like a normal human being until you get to know me, and then it's too late.
Too late.
John, I have to tell you, are you aware you have a celebrity doppelganger?
Well, I was Bono for 4 years.
Okay,
I
that's
was
not who
Chicago's own Bono.
you know who I was thinking of. Put
What's that?
put the fedora back on for a second.
All right.
And
Again,
I'm
for folks listening to the podcast are just loving this right now.
What's gonna be really sad is that I'm dressed completely like Indiana Jones, and Dave's gonna tell me I look like somebody who is not Indiana Jones, and that is going to hurt me.
Did you look at the photo I just sent you guys? This is Dave Filoni.
Oh, actually, that is
Clone
not
Wars.
that is actually pretty good.
Yeah, not bad. Yeah.
That's pretty good.
Especially with and actually even us outside of the fedora, like the first time I saw you, I thought, oh, this guy looks like Dave Filoni. And now wearing the indie hat, that just reinforces it that much more.
Dave Filoni's done a really good job of working in other people's playgrounds, which is all I've ever wanted.
Yeah, there you go. It's fitting.
Mm-hmm.
That's way better for me for the longest time. For folks who might have seen me around at different conventions, I get compared to Horatio Sands. There was one time when I was hosting a panel and I was asked if I was Kevin Smith. They said I looked like Kevin Smith back when Kevin Smith was a really big dude. You know, since Kevin Smith has lost a lot of weight. Good for him though. He did it because for health reasons. I think he looks a little too skinny right now, but hey, everybody. But yeah, I go, dude, what are you trying to say?
Well, he looks like a guy that had a heart attack.
Yes, which he did.
Yeah.
So anywho, and so Dave, in this point, you're getting kind of a double dose of the nerdery that both John and I bring to today's episode when it comes to Indiana Jones, which is fine because you're twice the Bond nerd that either of us are. So it's funny because I would always find myself gravitating back toward whenever we would watch the Bond movies in our retrospectives. I'd always find myself gravitating back towards the Indiana Jones films because there was so much that would happen in Bond movies that would trigger memories of indie films, not realizing that was Steven Spielberg pretty much putting on his own quote unquote Bond film. As a preface to all this, for folks who are first watching this show for the first time, listening to this show for the first time, this is our, if all things go according to plan, this is also our debut on the Radio Misfits podcast network. So if you're listening to this show for the first time, then hopefully we'll get more episodes on the network throughout the year. Shaken Not Heard was a little project that Dave and I put together. We wanted to look at all the Bond movies in order from Dr. No through No Time to Die. We would watch the films. We would kind of take our own perspective, how we felt about watching it in a contemporary setting versus our memories of watching them when we were kids, when we first saw them, whether it was in a theater or on television or on home video with our parents when we were kids. And Dave himself, way bigger Bond fanatic than I was. But over the last year, throughout 2021, I really came to appreciate James Bond in a way that I didn't realize I could. And watching all these films, not only that, getting into the books and some of the other ephemera that surrounds James Bond, got a good sense of how he influenced pop culture. But definitely for folks who know James Bond and for folks who know Indiana Jones, Indiana Jones is, for all intents and purposes, James Bond's son in a way. For those who don't know the story, this happened right in 1977, I believe it was. George Lucas is in Hawaii, wanting to get away from what he expects will be the box office bomb of a particular film called Star Wars. He was so stressed out about that movie. He thought for sure it was going to bomb at the box office. He wanted to be as far away from Hollywood and from that whole thing as he could. So he takes a vacation in Hawaii, is hanging out on the beach when He's away from. This is before social media, mind you. This is before everyone had cell phones, and that you could be reached at a moment's notice no matter where you were. So he's hanging out on the beach, and who does he run into but Steven Spielberg, who was also hanging out, taking a vacation with his fam. And they're making sandcastles on the beach. Steven Spielberg says, I've always wanted to make a Bond movie. He tells, as he's talking to George Lucas about all his ambitions, he said he would love to make a James Bond film. He knows he's never going to get approached for it, but he would love to do it. And George Lucas, infamously or famously, depending on how you look at it, says, you don't need, to an extent, I have something better than Bond. And he pitches the story of Indiana Jones, at that time known as Indiana Smith. That would change when they got into their little brainstorming sessions, saying that Indiana Jones would be very much like Bond, to follow the Bond template, going around the world, having different adventures, but instead of being a secret agent, he's an archaeologist / grave robber, and would emulate the serials of the 1930s, 40s, 50s. And what Lucas thought would be the start of a new franchise, something that would equal James Bond. And what do you know? Star Wars turns into this big hit. Jaws, which is something that Spielberg would have just finished, also a huge hit. And Lucas says, do you want to tell Spielberg, do you want to do Indiana Jones? They pair up on a movie called The Raiders of the Lost Ark. And after that, it's cinematic history. Now, if you've watched all the Indiana Jones movies and you've watched all the James Bond films, you will find a lot of influence in the Sean Connery films. If anything, From Russia with Love, to me, is the one that screams that screams Spielberg lifting from that a lot. I'll get into specifics in a bit, but that one again would just show how much Spielberg was into Bond. And if you look at other movies throughout Spielberg's career, he will put a little wink and a nod at the James Bond in Catch Me If You Can. There's that whole sequence when Leonardo DiCaprio's character goes to the theater and sees a Bond film, and then he wants to have his own Bond suit and car and all those things. So it's so funny that Steven Spielberg, I don't know if he still wants to make a Bond movie. Maybe that sort of thing is like he's gotten that out of his system, but it always seems to turn up in his films in one form or another. I won't even get started on Chris Nolan, because I just watched Dunkirk this past weekend, and I found like 3 different actors in there who could be cast as a new Bond. So the Nolan's been doing Bond movies too, with Tenet and Inception and all his other films. And the Batman movies, I think that was him scratching his James Bond itch as well.
Maybe now that West Side Story sort of bombed, they can get Spielberg at a discount to do the next Bond movie.
Yeah, if not the next Indiana Jones, which he gave to James Mangold.
Yeah.
That's the thing. You could tell that Spielberg was kind of like losing his Jones for that franchise. I would say, after Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, which to this day, it drives me nuts how so many people want to slag that film. And they say, and you even have folks in entertainment sites and writers talking about how it's the worst of the indie films and the least successful of. I go, excuse me, that Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, if I remember correctly, made like over $450 million, which is pretty damn good. When you make close
the
to
biggest movie that summer next to Iron Man, and Iron Man was the one that was a surprise. And then, of course, Dark Knight later that summer. But in May, it was Iron Man and Indiana Jones.
Yeah. So they were by no means box office bombs, They made money, and the indie franchises made over $1 billion. I think close to $2 billion now. So hence Disney buying that property and wanting to do stuff with it, which is a topic maybe we'll get into later or another day. But still, today we're talking about the relationship between Bond and Indiana Jones. We pulled you into this, John, because again, you're as big an indie nerd as I am, if not bigger.
Yeah, I know you're as big as an indie nerd as I am because I never felt the need to interrupt you with one of the stories. I was like, oh, he'll get to that. I was like, well, that Spielberg wanted to make Bond and they wouldn't let him because he wasn't British. Oh, he'll get to it.
Wait, Sam Mendes wasn't British, is he?
Yeah, he is.
He is? Oh.
Wow.
Fukunaga
did not want American directors, and I think they've never had one.
Fukunaga, the guy who did No Time to Die, is the first American director.
I thought he was Japanese.
Well, he's of Japanese descent, but he's American.
But he's American. Okay.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Which is fine. I mean, I'm not going to say Bond does have a particular sensibility to him, and it's like when they talk about Doctor Who, you have to have someone, a Brit, playing him. It doesn't necessarily have to be English. Could be a Scottish person. It's fine, but it has to be someone from the aisle, so to speak. Just like that's generally who you cast as Bond. You generally tend to have a Brit or an Irishman playing Bond.
But someone from the UK.
Someone from the UK, correct. So
on the other hand, they've also had there have been some bad Bond movies that have been directed by British directors. So
true.
They do have.
I don't think it's a mark of quality. It's more of a gatekeeping thing.
It's a certain sensibility, and we've talked about this. I know, when we've had fans from, some of the guys from Ultimate Bond Cast, they just love. Well, even you, Dave. I've talked to you about, it's workmen. The work that these guys did was essentially just point the camera, frame the shot, take us from point A to point B. Nothing spectacular. In some cases, something kind of cool, but there is nothing in the early Bond films that a kid with their iPhone can't top these days. And they are topping it. You go on freaking YouTube and TikTok and you see some of the videos that this current generation of filmmakers doing, and they're doing it on a low budget, and it's incredible. And so, but I don't want to slag early Bond folks because they were the pioneers. They were the ones setting that up, and it ended up being a cultural touchstone, and people still talk about those films. And so all respect to them. But Brits though, they have to have their tea times in the middle. And when I mean tea time, I don't mean like they want to go out to the course. That was a thing that poor Lucas, back to Lucas again, working in Lesden Studios in Great Britain when they're filming Star Wars, and when they're trying to get things done. Boom, well, it's time for tea. It's in our contract. These British great craftsmen, but it's in their contract. They can only work so many hours. Boom, break for tea.
Those studios ran like television. Those guys didn't care what movie or show they were making because next week they'd be making something else.
Yep.
So what it comes down to is I don't want to work late on Wednesday. They didn't have a stake in it because after Star Wars they probably did Moonraker.
They're at those studios, yeah, at Elstree Studios, which are I want to say they are still there, but they're not as used as they've been in the past. You have other, let's say you've got the big complex now in Atlanta, where Marvel was set up for the longest time, but now they're moving. Were they moving to New Zealand or Australia? I forget where they're going.
Well, Australia did the prequels, the Star Wars prequels, and The Matrix. They were the big studio for a long time. And New Zealand, of course, Peter Jackson built that whole country up, so they could have the biggest now. But
it's my understanding, because Jackson did sell Weta Studios.
He sold Weta, yeah, within the last month.
Yeah. But they do have a big, Marvel has just built a brand new studio. I want to say But where is Chris Hemsworth from again? Is he
Australia. He's
Yeah,
Australia.
it's in Australia. They have a brand. They have the big new soundstage and everything that they have down in Australia, where a lot of the Marvel films are going to go into production there.
That's weird. And I know we're not talking about the MCU now, but as worldwide as those films are, the characters are so East Coast American based because that's where the Marvel offices were, and that's where Stan Lee and Jack Kirby and Steve Ditko were. So they just drew the streets around them. To know that they're not even going to be made in this country, it's like, I know it's mostly green screen, but it's like, I think the next time you make a Spider-Man, I would really like them to make it in America.
Green screen or Toronto. I mean, come on.
Yeah.
The time they were, which is something too that we would run into with the Bond films too. You could tell that they had some countries sitting in for others, and you go, oh wow, that's not that country. Oh, I did not know that.
It was like the X-Files, where everywhere in America was a rainy forest.
Everything was Portland.
Yeah, it was Vancouver until season 6, when it was Los Angeles.
Anyway, I'm curious, John, when it comes to when you think about the connections between Bond and Indy, like what were the things that impressed you, or what is the thing that makes you go, huh, I get that, or what makes you appreciate either character more?
Well, it's definitely in the DNA. I think they're both based on episodic adventures of one character, very physically based. Unlike something like Sherlock Holmes, that's mostly cerebral, and maybe you get a running scene or somebody shoots one gun. They're both very hard action, and as you said, they travel the world. They're a single character. There's a different woman in every film, which I always thought clung to the Bond formula a little too much, because Karen Allen was such a presence in the first film that when they made Temple of Doom, they backdated it a couple of years before Raiders, because everyone was thinking, well, where's Karen Allen? Isn't the fact that they're a couple supposed to be a big part of it? And of course, they bring her back in the fourth film. So that's one of the things that I think they tried too much to make like Bond. But I think the biggest difference, which I love, is that Indy's rumpled. And he's not smooth, and there are scenes, for certainly like in Temple of Doom, where Indy's wearing the Goldfinger tuxedo. That's an absolute hammer on the head. But he's still not as suave. He's not as smooth. He's still got rough edges. He's still a broken in leather jacket. He's not a tuxedo guy. And I think the locales are that too. Everywhere he goes is dustier and dirtier than Bond. Bond travels the world, but Bond's in a 5-star hotel. Bond travels the Autobahn. Indy climbs up the side of the road, and I think that's one of the things that appealed to it. Indy's also not that good at fighting. I remember I had a friend that had never seen Raiders of the Lost Ark, and I said, "Okay, just sit down. We're watching it." And we watched the whole thing. And at the end, I said, "What do you think?" He went, "He fought too many guys." He doesn't win many fights. Yep. But there's still the ingenuity. There's still like, how do I get out of this mess? Okay, I'll do this. I'll do this. I'll do something unexpected. He's charming in a more self-effacing way, but it's certainly nowhere close to being like a Matt Helm, or in like Flint, or even modern films like Kingsman. It's not cut of the same tropes as Bond. It's almost like the skeleton's the same, but it grew into a very different person.
Equally, though, that you would say he's got some of the same flaws that Bond has. I mean, he's also a womanizer. That's something that kind of gets downplayed later on. Mm-hmm. That it comes out a bit in Temple of Doom, but for laughs, and in Last Crusade. I mean,
Last Crusade, definitely.
He's straight up womanizer.
Yeah.
But he's supposed to be playing a character of that time, so to speak. Yeah, he gets his ass kicked quite a bit. And it's funny, the indie films, with the exception of Last Crusade, to an extent, Temple of Doom, Raiders, kind of problematic in their portrayals of certain minorities or of other cultures.
Well, Temple of Doom the most.
Yes.
I think Raiders, they treat everyone with respect except Nazis.
Except Nazis, right?
And Alfred Molina. But it's clear that Alfred Molina is not representative of them because he's British, as well as Henry Stevens, as well as half the Nazis. Okay, let me step back. It's as British as James Bond with one guy from Illinois.
Dave, tell John about that message you sent me the other day.
Which one?
The one about Alfred Molina.
Oh, I told Elliot I didn't realize he was in the movie.
Oh yeah, he's very young then.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
but he disappears into that character. He doesn't have he's a lot skinnier, and he doesn't quite have the voice. I mean, now no matter what part he plays, and he's a great actor with a lot of range, but that voice springs out. Like he's done voiceover on Rick and Morty, and I'll immediately go Alfred Molina. And currently he's in No Way Home now, and he's so much of a presence that when you see him, it's a full head-on shot. Like that was the linchpin of the trailer. But back then, he was a character actor that, like, I'll do this part. I'll play brown face.
Brown face for sure.
Yeah.
Because Alfred Molina, for folks who don't realize it, he plays Satipo, one of the two guides that Indy is walking through the Peruvian jungles in the beginning.
The idol.
You have to find the golden idol, the Chachapoyan idol of fertility. And unless you are as big a nerd as I was and read both the novelization and the comic book, didn't pick up that A, his name was Satipo, and B, when he finally meets his end by accidentally, getting impaled by the spikes that are triggered by crossing a beam of light, you don't realize that Indy is saying adios stupido and not adios Satipo.
I never noticed that.
So, because Harrison Ford kind of mumbles it.
Yeah.
Adios stupido.
He's got a lot on his mind. There's a boulder coming.
So,
was he really in brown face though? Wasn't he? Isn't Alfred Molina like Spanish, or at least part Spanish?
Yeah, but he's very British. I mean, he's definitely wearing darker makeup, and he's putting on way more of an accent. There's a lot of senors, but I don't know. I mean, Elliot, you would probably be more to say than Dave or I about how offensive it was.
Again, for folks who are listening to the podcast and not watching this on video, my complexion is relatively darker than that of my two friends here.
Yes. With my ring light, I'm almost Iceman.
People calling like solicitors, like who call me not knowing who I am, think I'm Hispanic because of my last name.
Pinto. Yeah, I believe that. That. Pinto.
Yeah.
So, what are other characteristics about Indy and Bond that we think really connect them more closely? I'll go back to some more of the obvious ones. When they were going to be, quote unquote, finishing the trilogy, and I'm making the air quotes here, with Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, Spielberg is saying this is going to be the last Indy movie I'm going to do. These movies are fun, but I think I'm done with them. We need to do one last thing. We're going to introduce Indy's father. Who do you have to have play Indy's father but Sean Connery? Sean Connery, who everyone knows is, of course, the first Bond, and he plays Indy's dad. Really on the nose when it comes to the themes there.
Mm-hmm.
I will say this, though. I know there are a lot of folks who think of Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, and they love that film. Don't get me wrong. I loved it, too. I remember when I first saw it in the theater, I enjoyed it. But the reality is, you cast someone other than Sean Connery as his father, I don't think the movie works like it does.
Yeah, but to give Sean Connery credit, he's not playing Bond. He's not playing an action hero.
No,
he creates an entirely different character. He creates my father, basically. My father would walk around with that hat in the 80s, even. It's a performance unlike anything he ever did in his whole career. And he had a very long range career, but it's maybe the most enjoyable performance he does. He figures out how to balance Harrison Ford's performance and not copy or play against it. So I agree. The fact that he's Bond is a nice wink, but really it's the effort that Connery puts into that role that makes that film, because it is lightweight. I mean, I always think that Raiders of the Lost Ark is a perfect film. It's my favorite film ever made, and still nothing's pushed it off. And each one of the sequels are flawed, because Raiders of the Lost Ark is a perfect blend of, I think, every genre at once. It's espionage, it's romance, it's action, it's horror, it's comedy, and nothing is over anything else. And with each one of the sequels, in an attempt to top it, they all veer a little too much. Like Temple of Doom is a little too much of a horror movie. Crystal Skull is a little too much of a sci-fi movie. And Last Crusade is a little too much of a comedy. But because it's a comedy, that makes it even more endearing.
Exactly. Yeah. I agree. But again, I can't think of any. Maybe it's because when you have someone in a role, you can't think of anyone else in them. But to the point, who else do you cast as Indy's father that it works like it did with Connery? Connery, the thing with Connery, like I said when we first started Shaken Not Heard in the very beginning, and I told Dave this. I remember when I was a kid, I didn't get what the big deal about Sean Connery was. I didn't get why so many people talked about him being the Bond, the perfect Bond. It had to be, Sean Connery this, Sean Connery that, because I had very vague memories of Sean Connery. I grew up with Roger Moore as James Bond, so I thought, what's the deal with Sean Connery? And then I go back and I watch Dr. No, and I watch these films. I'm going, and when I watch Dr. No and Sean Connery appears on screen for the first time, boom, it hits you. You're like, okay, now I get it. Now I get why Sean Connery was the guy. You cast anybody else other than Sean Connery in this role, I'm sorry, Bond doesn't become the character that he is now. It just doesn't take off like he does. Same, like I would say with Indiana Jones. If they had decided to go through with Tom Selleck as Indy, like Lucas desperately wanted, and just like Spielberg was ready to do, I don't think you get another Indiana Jones movie outside of Raiders, because I don't think audiences connect with that character like they did with Harrison Ford playing him.
I remember Tom Selleck made was it King Solomon's Mines right after Raiders?
No, Quigley Down Under.
Quigley Down Under, thank you.
King Solomon's Mines was Richard Chamberlain.
Yeah, and neither one of those worked.
No,
there's an alchemy to it. And I was going to ask if Tom Selleck plays Indiana Jones, is it as good a movie? And Tom Selleck's a charismatic guy, but Harrison Ford was the full package. And honestly, even as a kid, I didn't see Raiders till probably its second run. My parents just didn't want to take me. They didn't think I would really like it, and I begged them. And part of why I wanted to go was it was a movie starring just Han Solo. Without Luke Skywalker, without Princess Leia. I was like, okay, what does Han Solo do for 2 hours? And because it was Harrison Ford, that was one of the main reasons I wanted to be there. And it's one of the main reasons I love Harrison Ford to this day. Han Solo is not as good a part as Indiana Jones, and he says so himself.
I agree. No, Han Solo is very two-dimensional in the first three films. It's not until The Force Awakens that Han Solo really becomes a fully three-dimensional character. And I say Harrison Ford gives his best Han Solo performance in that film.
Yeah.
Thomas wants to chime in here. Talking about Indy and Connery, odd given that Connery, Bond, is Indy's father and Bond being Indy's spiritual ancestor, despite the Bond novels and movies being set decades after the 30s settings for the Indy movies. True. And the irony, too, being that word is that Indy 5 actually takes place in the early 60s. So you're going to finally have Indiana Jones entering what you would call the Bond era in what would be the last Indiana Jones film.
And Connery was only something like what, 14 years older than Harrison Ford.
Yes.
So they weren't even that far apart in age. Which, again, to Connery's credit, he played it bald. He put on a gray beard. He played it older.
I mean,
Connery started aging very quickly early on, and then he looked old for many years.
Yeah. Well, he turned down Star Trek V to do The Last Crusade.
Yeah, you were telling me.
Choices you say that Connery made in his lifetime? That's probably good.
The Final Frontier?
The one that Shatner directed. He wanted Connery to play God. That's why they go to Shakari. That's the name of the planet they go to.
Mm.
Oh, okay. I get it.
It would have been it came out in the summer. It was also summer of '89.
Yeah. I was going to say, he would have been in it all of 5 minutes. Why turn it down? Just sit in the studio for 5 minutes, do a little voiceover work.
Maybe he read it.
That's true. He did also turn down Dumbledore.
He turned down Gandalf as well. Yeah.
Morpheus, I read too. Yeah.
But hey, let's. He's done a lot of great stuff too. When you're Bond and you have the resume that he has, and it wasn't like he needed the money,
No, and by the end of the century, he knew he was slowing down.
Yeah.
Because he said he turned down Lord of the Rings because he couldn't see himself shooting for a full year and living in New Zealand.
It's my understanding he turned down Harry Potter because he just didn't get it. He didn't understand it.
Is that like
a boy with glasses and an owl?
And then what does he go off and do? League of Extraordinary Gentlemen.
Is that his last film? Because that was almost my last film.
Yeah, I think that was his last movie. What a shame.
Really good comic book, though. Had they stayed faithful to the comic, it would have been better. But they wanted to turn it into a franchise and so on.
Yeah, they didn't know what faithful to the comic meant back then.
Not done. Well, in some cases, they still don't know.
Yeah. Well, remember, we never got the X-Men in superhero costumes for 20 years.
Well,
Yeah.
wasn't you can blame the Matrix for that, since you bring up the Matrix.
Oh yeah.
The Wachowski said, the trench coats, the black suits or whatever, the glasses, those are all taking the place of masks and capes and skin tight Lycra. And then the X-Men movie said, "Hey, we can do that."
I think part of it was still the Tim Burton Batman movies.
The rubber suits,
Black rubber, yeah.
Every character who's colorful. Not that Batman's really colorful, but characters who are otherwise colorful in black leather and which is fine for Batman. But no, I want to see Colossus in red and yellow and
hopefully when they make a Disney X-Men, we'll finally see that. I think what finally broke that black leather was Spider-Man, because that look is too iconic. When they finally made a Spider-Man movie, they couldn't change it that much. They were like, he needs to be red and blue, and he needs to have webs, and he needs to be covered head to toe because everybody knows what he looks like. And I think when that was a hit, they started to get more colorful and closer to the movies.
Yeah, but it was a patterned scuba suit. It was still
there was definitely a compromise going on there, but it doesn't look bad.
It doesn't look bad. And
the silver webs are overlaid, and there's a lot of texture going on. But for the time, it was really, really close.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Looking at, there is one thing though when you talk about the Bond and Indiana Jones relationship. I can't remember the name of the guy. He did this on his YouTube channel. He's a big indie nerd, just like me. Will from time to time has his little rants on his YouTube channel about Indiana Jones, but did one essentially kind of calling out Spielberg and Lucas for not making the Indy franchise a Bond type series. As I said, Lucas said, "I got something better. It's Indiana Jones. We're going to do it. We're going to have this character." But you've never seen, unlike Bond, you've never seen anyone else play Indiana Jones, at least in the films. You had Sean Patrick Flannery play him in the television series,
which is lost to time. And Disney Plus doesn't even want to put it on.
It's on Paramount Plus, though. It is on
Is it?
Paramount. Yes, it's on Paramount.
Were those any good? I've never seen any of those. No.
I bought all the DVDs when they put all the DVDs out when Crystal Skull came out, and I never finished them. I got halfway through the first season, and I was like, even as a completist.
Where did that originally air?
ABC on television.
Oh, okay.
ABC.
Yeah, it was a network show.
And the problem, well, if you want to call it a problem, because I have gone back and I've watched some of the episodes on Paramount Plus, and I could see what Lucas was trying to do. He was saying, well, we're not what he pitches it to ABC. The executives at ABC go, oh, great, Indiana Jones on television, we'll do that. And Lucas is like, I don't want, we're gonna make Indiana Jones like a historical retrospective. Indiana Jones is gonna be traveling through history, and we're going to put lesson plans, and teachers will be able to show this in class and then teach about history afterwards. That is my George Lucas, everyone.
Yeah. Did you ever hear that? Patton Oswalt bit about George Lucas?
Yes.
When he's talking about the prequels, and he's like, "You're going to see Darth Vader as a little kid." He's like, "I don't know if that's good." Well, the second one has Boba Fett. Oh, really? What's Boba Fett doing? He's going to be a little kid. And I realized, young Indiana Jones is exactly that bitch. Indiana Jones is going to be a little kid.
He was, and he was. He was
He
a
was
little
two
kid
kids.
and a teenager.
Yeah.
And okay, Dave, now's your time to break out your George Lucas impersonation.
I don't have one. You guys are pretty spot on, though. I think there almost needs to be a little bit more of like a Lorne Michaels in there somewhere.
Yeah.
Yeah, I got a little dash, a little more to Lauren.
You're a little bit of leaning back and thinking about how brilliant,
Yeah, there you go. Yeah.
The forces are really important. And in the frog neck, which every year gets easier.
Oh, ow.
Everything rhymes. My movies rhyme.
They're like sonnets. They're rhyming poems.
Yeah. And unfortunately, with Lucas, I think when he told Spielberg he had a Bond franchise, I think Spielberg was thinking they would do him like Bond every 2 years. And we got 3 in a decade, which isn't even as fast as Star Wars. And then nothing for 20 years, and then nothing for 20 years. I think the biggest problem with the Indiana Jones series is there's just not enough of them. They were so hard to make, and they took so long.
Well, it was because Luke.
I was going to say 3 in a decade is more Bond films than we got in the last decade.
Yeah, but the first decade.
Yeah. Well, when you have like 15 books to for source material.
No, you're right. There was a lot of source material there they could plumb for the films. Not so much for Indy.
Well, there's nothing for Indy. I mean, Indy's got inspirations, but that's one of the things why it's been so hard. Every time Disney's talked about rebooting it, it's not an adaptation. Like, you can have another Bond because it was originally Ian Fleming's novels. Just the same way you can have another Batman and you can have another Spider-Man, because they're all adaptations of something that was in print first. Indiana Jones was made as a movie with Harrison Ford. And I think that's one of the reasons we never even got an animated series when Star Wars was cranking them out. I always thought an animated series would have been perfect for Indiana Jones. Just 20-minute stories going after different artifacts and having different adventures, and you're in, you're out. You don't have to worry about even character development. It could just all be stunt-based. And I don't even think they ever seriously pitched one because Harrison Ford is so identified.
He is so identified for it. And let's be honest, though, the reason you're going to have a cartoon, and this is why you had the cartoons for so much Star Wars stuff, is you want to be able to market the toys. And Indiana Jones toys just don't sell like Star Wars toys do. Heck, we've talked about this for the longest time with the James Bond stuff. James Bond merchandise tends to be very high end. It tends to be for older guys more in our range. You're not going to find James Bond action figures. You're not going to find James Bond Lego sets, with the exception of the Lego set where you can reproduce the Aston Martin, which I think goes for like $200. You're not going to find, but you're not going to find like adventure sets, play sets, different, like the Dr. No lair in Lego with little guys in nuclear suits and a little James Bond that knocks a guy into a giant vat, which causes the entire thing to go into a nuclear meltdown, thus making the entire Caribbean uninhabitable.
I would buy that. I would 100% buy that.
So having the cartoon, but I want to, when the James Bond Jr. Cartoon series came out, I mean, a big part of that was they were trying to market not only to get kids into it, but also to be able to sell merchandise, to be able to sell toys. And I think there was a very brief number of a very few things that came out. There was a James Bond Jr. cartoon series and comic book series. And you would know they would want to have like action figures, the vehicles, play sets, and stuff like that. It just didn't take off.
Yeah, well, the same thing with Indy. They tried a little harder with Indy, but I think I even told the story when we were talking about this on one of your podcasts. But I used to work for Diamond Toys on and off, and when Crystal Skull came out, there was a ton of Indiana Jones merchandise, and everybody tried stuff you just mentioned, Elliot. There were Lego sets, there were Kenner action figures, there were Sideshow and Hot Toys high-end figures, there was prop replicas of the Idol and 6 scales of the Ark, and all of it was gone by the next year. And what they told me Diamond at the time was people want to buy Indy and then they're done. It's kind of the same thing with Bond. It's like they want one that has a jacket and a hat and a whip and looks like Harrison Ford. And then after that, you don't need anything else. And everything else just kind of sat on the shelves because he's an iconic character. But he doesn't exhibit an exotic world. He exhibits a world that looks like ours. And once you get past him, it's girls and snakes and Nazis and sometimes kids. But nobody, maybe Sean Connery is probably the only one, ironically, that you could say has an iconic look that you want. I have, it's in the other room, but I have 12-inch figures back then when they were making them. And I have the Indy and a Sean Connery Bond. And I found the motorcycle from like a World War II set. And I put that in there. And there is not a single person in the last 14 years that I've had that hasn't stopped and pointed that out. But there's not a lot of things like that. Whereas Star Wars, it's like every alien, every ship. Or Marvel, every character is visually interesting, whether they're a hero or a villain or a sidekick. Both with Indy and Bond, they crafted that character and dropped him in a world we know.
Why is it then? Okay, well, let's go back. Why would you say, can you cast, like with Bond, you can cast, we've accepted the idea of other actors playing Bond. Mm-hmm. Okay, we've done that. For a while, it was shaky in the beginning with Sean Connery, but it happened. And then now it's become fait accompli. Eventually, you're going to get a new guy playing Bond, just like eventually you're going to get a new actor playing Spider-Man or Batman. You're always going to get a new actor
or
playing...
three at once.
Or three at once, right?
You get all of them in the same
Spider-Man
movie.
and Batman. Yeah.
That movie has now beaten Titanic.
Oh, wow, really?
People want to see all the Spider-Mans so much. It's now the 6th biggest movie of all time.
I'm going to put a pin in that, maybe to talk later today or on next week on our show, on our different show, mm-hmm. But which I'll talk about in a moment. But why is it that then can we say, will audiences accept a new person playing Indiana Jones? I'm going to start. I'll say it for myself. In the beginning, I would say, no way, no how, no way. I don't care. I don't want it. I don't want someone new playing Indiana Jones. It's Harrison Ford. I'm happy with what I got. Okay. That's the other thing too. As you said, Dave, there have been 26 James Bond films, but yes, they were of varying quality, right? Some of them were, not good. We've had 4 Indiana Jones films, and the one that didn't meet everyone's expectations gets vilified to no end by certain folks in the nerdverse, and it's annoying as all get out to hear people.
Something has to be the worst.
Yeah, but it annoys the crap out of me that it's like, oh, Crystal Skull's the worst Indiana Jones movie ever, and I go, really? I mean, look at it this way. There's very little difference between Indiana Jones and the Crystal Skull and Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. They follow the same formula essentially. The only difference is Crystal Skull has a hell of a lot more expository dialogue. I mean, we're talking Harrison Ford is fighting. They're fighting Russian, agents in a milkshake. In a was a sop. What did they call it in the 50s?
Soda shop.
The soda shop, right? And Mutt, and they're running away, and Mutt's getting his motorcycle started up to get away the whole time while Harrison Ford is spouting off expository dialogue as he's running.
Which you don't hear because John Williams' score is on top of that.
Yes. He's barely, but he's like yelling at it, and he didn't do any of that in the previous films. But this one is so exposition heavy, they have to do that. Fine. But it's one of my favorite scenes. It's a throwaway line when Mutt does the whole bit when they're in the jungle and he like punches one of the Russians so they can try to get away, and they're running through the jungle, and Indy's like, what? And him and Marion are following behind as they're running through, and Indy out of nowhere mutters under his breath, "This is intolerable," which is the same thing his own father would say. You see, so it's like Indy's becoming his dad. It's that whole, no matter how hard we try, we become our parents. So I loved all those bits about that film. I loved how there's that other line when Indy references his time riding with Pancho Villa, which, Mutt says, bullshit, really? No way. You rode with Pancho Villa? He goes, well, kidnapped, rode with. It's kind of, but he's referencing the Young Indiana Jones Chronicles, thus making that television series canon in Indy lore. So all those little touches, which indie fans just want to trounce on it and bitch about it, and like, enough already.
There's more about Temple of Doom that bothers me than Crystal Skull. I think Crystal Skull is mushy. It's just not tight. But Temple of Doom, there, besides the unfortunate portrayals of other cultures, but Indy's like out of character. It's only the second film, and there's a hard edge to him. He's talking about Fortune and Glory, which they had to retcon with It Belongs in a Museum.
Well, that's mind you, it is a prequel, so he's harder, and it's by the time you get to It Belongs in a Museum, but
it's not a prequel where it's like an origin story. It's just another adventure where he's just a little harder and a little darker. And it goes for shock and gore. I mean, I would rather watch Crystal Skull than watch Temple of Doom, because Temple of Doom, when it's not good, you zone out. But with Crystal Skull, when it's not good, you kind of zone out on it. But with Temple of Doom, it's like offensive at certain points.
You're in India. You're in India when an old man in a tattered smock appears on the shore.
just sitting there, and then offers you rancid food,
and leads you through through the fields, and at one moment is behind you, and then out of nowhere ends up in front of you.
All of the Indiana Jones films have a wizened old man with a very high voice that goes, "Come, move here. We give to the world. You go to the world."
Well, again, I mean, you only live twice. Probably the most problematic of all the Bond films,
and it's one of my favorites because it's just so silly. I don't even think it's cultural appropriation. I just think he tries to pass himself off as a Japanese person, and it's like Inspector Clouseau. I'm like, why does anybody buy that? You're in Japan. Why does anybody believe?
I don't know, the eye surgery.
We believe his terrible disguise. But going back to your earlier question, I have a really hard time thinking of anybody but Harrison Ford being Indiana Jones, because you don't have that extra step of interpretation. And I think Disney's wary to do it, which is why they're making another one with Harrison Ford. And Harrison Ford knocked it out of the park in Force Awakens, and he knocked it out of the park in Blade Runner 2049, but he's approaching 80, and that's a lot of pressure. By this point, Sean Connery was turning down Gandalf at the age that Harrison Ford is right now, playing Indiana Jones. I find it very hard to fit somebody into that mold because it's so based on his charisma and his mannerisms and his body language. And, like River Phoenix is good in Last Crusade despite his Kurt Cobain haircut because he did Mosquito Coast with Harrison Ford and he's doing all of his little mannerisms. And I think when you think of Indiana Jones, you think of Harrison Ford's portrayal of it. And maybe that's why anytime Harrison Ford wasn't involved, it didn't go very far. The comic books were always stop and start, and Young Indiana Jones didn't last. And as I said, they never even attempted to do an animated series. I think if they really believed, there were rumors about Chris Pratt and Bradley Cooper becoming Indiana Jones, and I think if Disney had more faith in it, we wouldn't be getting this fifth movie with James Mangold that Spielberg's not directing, that Harrison Ford broke his leg on twice. I think they would have pulled the plug and just put somebody else in the hat. You could see they were trying to sneak Shia LaBeouf into that position, and nobody liked it. And Shia LaBeouf was insane, so he wasn't carrying any franchises. So I don't know. I don't know that we can do it. I'm excited about a fifth one, but I don't know. I feel like they have tried to do the genre more than they've tried to do Indiana Jones. They've done Tomb Raider. We're getting Tom Holland as Uncharted. And those games are absolutely a ripoff of Indiana Jones.
Indies become like John McClane, where, then John McClane grew up and his son ended up being, a cop too. For folks who didn't see the last Die Hard movie where both John McClane's kids are grown up.
And last for you, because you have a taint that's not on your soul.
Well, my taint is anyway. But that's the way the film franchises go, and the thing with Indiana Jones is that he's aging. That's the other thing that makes him different from Bond. When you talk about the relationship between the two characters, is if you stick with Harrison Ford playing that character, as they've said, he's always the character of Indy is playing at Harrison Ford's age, or they're playing to age. So that's why you had the first two films in the same decade, and then they kept moving forward. Crystal Skull's in the 1950s. Indy 5 is going to end up in the 1960s. And presumably this is like the last Indiana Jones story. James Mangold did the last Wolverine story. So
right. We just got the last Bond story, even though we'll get another Bond.
Right. And then we're probably going to get the last Indiana Jones story. Thing is, with the difference being with Bond, we already know there's going to be another Bond. We already know that story is going to go because audiences have accepted there's going to be another actor playing the character. In fact, that's part of the allure of that character. Finding out, who's going to be the next Bond? This is going to be, we're going to be discussing that ad nauseum on this show. So,
yeah.
That's back to what I was saying about the gentleman who Retroblast is the name of his show on YouTube. Look up Retroblast. And it does this great rant about why didn't we get a real indie franchise? Why didn't they do that? My question then would be, is that something that we would really, really want? Would you have wanted, like, say, 10 Indiana Jones movies where, like, 5 of them were good and the rest of them were like, meh?
I would have loved to have had like 10 Indiana Jones movies between 1981 and 1999. Because like if we had 2 or 3 a year and they were just different adventures and they didn't have to take place in different time periods because Harrison Ford was aging. Yes. After Crystal Skull felt like the end. There was no talk of doing a fifth, even though, as you said, it was very successful. It was overshadowed by the superhero genre coming into its age. But they looked at that as being the last one. And I think they're only doing this fifth one because Disney has it. And they're like, well, we own this and we've never made anything with it. I wouldn't want them now, and I wouldn't want them rebooted now. I'd rather see a different character, I don't have high hopes for Uncharted because we haven't had great video game movies. But if it's really good, yeah, let Tom Holland make 7 of those. You know, I just can't see it working. In my head, I keep thinking of Inspector Clouseau. You know, I think we were talking about this last time. They recast Peter Sellers twice, and it went nowhere because it was so based on his character and his mannerisms and his style. And I think in a lot of ways it's like that.
You mentioned Tom Holland in Uncharted. It came out recently that Tom Holland himself wanted to pitch his own James Bond film. He wanted to do an origin, James Bond origin, which if you read the Dynamite comics, they've done that. Jeff Parker wrote a 2-part miniseries of the origin of James Bond. This was back when he was in the Navy, the
Royal Navy.
The Royal Navy during World War II.
Yeah.
Holland wanted to do like that, like an origin, like young Bond, like coming into being like even predating what happened in Casino Royale. Because in Casino Royale, that's, you know, he's already a trained agent. He just pretty much just needs a kill. You get his kills in so he can earn his 00 designation.
Yeah, I was going to make a point when we talked about Casino Royale that if you just remove and tweak a couple things, it's not that far removed from being like a straightforward Bond movie, because it's not really the origin part of the movie. Yeah, of him getting his license to kill is the very beginning, and then I guess him like learning this life lesson of, you know, not opening up his heart to a woman in his line of work is part of his origin. But other than that, I mean, you change a couple things, it could work as it could have been like how Pierce Brosnan was pushing if he had come back for a 5th, he wanted to do a straightforward modern update of Casino Royale as his 5th movie. And maybe it would have been like the end of his Bond rather than the launching point for a newer Bond actor. He could have ended his era as Bond with that movie. But you could take out the beginning of him getting his 00 license, and you wouldn't have to change a whole lot about that movie. It's not really as much an origin story as like Batman Begins is a Batman origin story, or, you know, but the first movies for all the big Marvel and DC characters that we've gotten.
My thing though, yeah, good point. My thing though is when you take out that stuff that comes later. Would you call that like, will people go, oh, okay, is that a Bond movie, or is it really just a Bond movie where we call the character James Bond? You know, because what is Bond about? Bond is about the 00 license. Bond is about, you know, the travel. Bond is about the women, you know. So you know, do I want to see young James Bond? Do I want to see James Bond as a kid? You know, so I want to.
Well, come. Lucas behind this.
You know,
Tom Holland, and he wants James Bond to be a little kid.
I mean, yes, you can go into the whole thing about, like, you know, him growing up with his parents, like they did in Batman Begins. You know, the death of his, you know, Bond's parents dying in the ski accident, which, you know, could have been. Was it an accident, or was it a conspiracy? Wait. Are they really dead? You know, there are all these things that.
Now you're making me think about the Andrew Garfield Spider-Man movie.
The Andrew Garfield Spider-Man, exactly. They went in that direction with that. It's there are a lot of times when you say, where is this untread ground in a character? So if you get into an origin story with Bond, you have that temptation to start doing stuff that kind of takes you away from what everyone knows, like they did with they've done with Star Trek in Discovery, where the Michael Burnham character in Star Trek Discovery is Spock's sister, who we've never talked about in all these years, and they had to go through this whole thing to explain why Spock.
And he already had a brother we never talked about in Star Trek V, which Sean Connery turned down. Trifecta. I just checked all Geek Bingo.
Geek Bingo. For those of you at home.
If you had Shakari, and why does God need a starship?
That was
But I would argue that we don't need a young James Bond because we want him to be suave. We want him to be confident. That's what we need. Honestly, I think because I watched it again recently. I think that if you want a young modern James Bond, we have the Kingsman. Those movies are pretty good. Matthew Vaughn's kicking ass on that. The new one's not doing as well, and that's like a prequel, but I haven't heard bad things about those. And I kind of feel like you could do that with Bond, but why when Kingsman is already doing that and going so far out with it to things that the Broccoli's would never let happen?
Yeah. I don't want Tom Holland as Bond, but I would pay to see him as James Bond Jr.
Yeah, I don't need to see Tom Holland in a sex scene. Like kissing Zendaya, all right. But
yeah,
I don't need him charming the pants off of Zendaya.
wow. Yeah, those are some images that you planted that I didn't need.
They could have spent millions of dollars to plant those images in your head. But once they're in there, you reject them.
No. Anywho, but yeah, it's funny, as we're talking this through, I would see there are certain things that people just won't accept with James Bond, just like there are things that people just won't accept with Indiana Jones.
Yeah,
they're things like they really Crystal Skull gets a lot of grief because no one likes the sci-fi aspect of it. No one likes that angle. Fine. But oh yeah, the other point that because at that, I think if anything, that's pretty much Spielberg said, okay, that's it. I'm done at this point. That's it. I said I was done with Last Crusade. I'm definitely done with Crystal Skull. I'm sure it's very much an unsaid thing because he goes, look, I respect George Lucas and I will do what George Lucas says. These stories have to be stories he approves. The reason we didn't get 10 movies, as you said, John, the movies are very hard to come up with the stories for. Why? Because they have to be a MacGuffin that Lucas wanted, a MacGuffin that he approves. Mm-hmm. And then he's got to convince Spielberg this is what what Indy's going for in this movie. And then Spielberg and Lucas have got to go back to Ford and say, okay, this is a story. Now Ford wants a script that works for him.
So there were a lot of scripts by a lot of really good screenwriters and really good filmmakers that never saw the light of day. Dozens of really good Indiana Jones movies that just weren't made.
They were okay Indiana Jones movies. I read that Jeb Stewart script. I was like, eh.
The Frank Darabont, the first pass of.
I read the Darabont one too. I was like, everyone say Darabont really reads. There's so much from the Darabont script that made it into Crystal Skull.
Oh yeah. It's really the first draft, but it's a better movie.
Yeah, I don't know. The wing walking scene was.
I like the wing walking.
Well, fine, and he had the swinging through the vines thing, which ended up subbing out Shia LaBeouf. Mutt did that instead. So
yeah, I think if Harrison Ford had swung on the vines, we'd be fine with it. And if they didn't loop in a Tarzan yell, it's all about tone, that movie.
Oh, really? Like they did with Roger Moore.
Or the slide whistle on the car.
Yeah.
See, that's a thing too that gets me because I think both Indy and Bond have really similar limitations, not just with what people will accept of the character, but where can you take them now? Where can you take these characters? What stories are left to tell with them? Because as we saw throughout the latter years in the Bond films, they just kept repeating the same types of villains over again, the same type of weapon, same type of conspiracy, same deal. Dave, you've said Bond struggles when you don't have the Russians, when you don't have the Cold War, you have a problem. Indy struggles when you don't have Nazis.
Yeah.
So there's kind of both characters have these limitations when it comes to their enemies and what people want to see happen in their stories, which makes me kind of skeptical as much as I would like to see another Indiana Jones movie, which we'll get, although some of the stuff I've seen leaking, I'm a little bit worried about what they're going to do. But I don't know.
I like James Mangold.
Yeah. And just like I'm really curious as to, I am not so much wondering about how they're going to recast James Bond. Is how they're going to come up with a new story, or are they just going to go back to the books again and start adapting them again? But maybe, as Dave, as you suggested, try to be more faithful to the books, as you go through. Maybe.
Well, my suggestion was to have the movies, but then you have like a separate, like.
We all heard that.
That's my dog, folks. She's snorting really loud.
I'm glad it's your dog and not you.
It sounded like your dog disagreeing with Dave. It was like, You're like, not only will they reboot Bond.
My suggestion was you have the movies and keep the movies contemporary, but I don't think the Broccoli's are ever going to go for this, but because they've been very protective of the Bond brand, and that's why you don't have spin-off movies and spin-off TV series. And really the only other thing you have going outside of the movies is that's like some Star Wars character. Like a dewback or a bantha.
Are you writing that into Mos Espa?
I assume she's right at your feet.
She is literally at my feet right now, and it seems like whenever she hears you, she starts snorting. So
She remembers me. She has association because she spent most of her time in my lap sleeping at the shelter. But have like a mini series like on, I don't know, Netflix or, if anything, it'll be on Amazon now, of like period piece, like Bond, faithful adaptations of the books set at the time they were written. So set in the 50s and the early 60s. When there's enough, some of the movies are so, like You Only Live Twice, so has such little in common with the source material that it basically could feel like a completely new thing. The couple's shared, location or plot ideas or characters. But I think the more interesting thing is, and I think we've talked about this when the three of us talked about No Time to Die, is going forward with Bond. Yeah, obviously they'll have to reboot it and come up with a clever hook of how how to do something new and different. But do you go back to everything pre-Casino Royale where the movies were all just like these one-off adventures with the slightest of continuity between them? Or do you continue in the way of the Daniel Craig movies where they're like, it tells like a full story? I think they should go back to the pre-Casino Royale days where you could just kind of, if you're introducing someone to the Bond franchise for the first time, you can just pick any movie outside of the Craig movies, obviously, and they don't have to have seen other Bond movies to understand what's happening in the one they're watching. So to me, that's as much of how do they reboot it, who do they cast? To me, that's as interesting of a question of are they going to go back to the old model or keep it the way they've been doing it with the Daniel Craig template.
Yeah, I love that idea, David. I agree. I don't know that the Broccoli's would ever do it, but I feel like the BBC could do a season of book because there's not a ton of big special stunts and special effects in those books. And I've only read a handful. I certainly haven't read as much as you have, but you could do that on a Sherlock type budget and make it look great.
And those movies, you could even do those movies. The books are relatively short. I mean, each one you could do an hour and a half, or because I know a lot of those British shows are longer, like each episode, because they do shorter seasons, but the episodes are much longer. Each episode could be a movie, or one book. You can cover Dr. No or Casino Royale in one, 80 or 90-minute movie.
Yeah, and they'd have
a bunch of action scenes to like pad things out, like the Eon movies.
Yeah.
But isn't that what people expect though from Bond though? I mean,
but this would be that's what I'm saying. Would be like a different animal. This is not to like supplant the movie franchise because that there's a reason that's worked so well for 60 years. This would be like, in conjunction with that, which is exactly why I don't think it would happen because I don't think they're going to do something. They would ever do something like that.
You're right. They're so protective of the brand. I can't see them doing two things at once. There was talk
They're not going to do a Bond multiverse.
Yeah, they never did that Jinx movie.
Yeah, You're not going to have like Timothy Dalton coming back
Oh, see,
with whoever the next Bond actor is. Even though I would love that personally, I would love that.
Be like a Doctor Who anniversary special.
Yeah, or
Bond
Brosnan.
gets a time machine.
Yeah, Brosnan's young
Into
enough.
the Bondiverse.
Yeah, into the Bondverse.
Speaking of contemporizing our characters, Thomas chimes in about Indy. Try to do an Indy movie set in the 1960s or 70s, and he spends the first 2 acts navigating local officials on antiquities. Nobody can take pottery shards out of the ground without the proper paperwork. Remember, he was a grave robber, not just an archaeologist, but also a grave robber. But that's true. The one thing
if I remember correctly, I think Tom pitched an idea to me a while back ago about an Indiana Jones plot. I don't remember the specifics of it. He might remember, but it was pretty interesting. He should post that and see what you guys think about it.
I know I've got 2 MacGuffins. There are 2 things that I've been thinking about for Indy would be interesting. A mummy. Tom says a mummy. But we've had The Mummy, right? I mean, we've done those films.
And those were very based on Indiana Jones. They just
very indie.
They just upped it. They just cranked it way up.
There's even a scene in the sequel where Brendan Fraser is wearing the jacket and the hat, just as a nod. He even says it himself. He's like, he loves Harrison Ford, and he was like, that character was him doing a nod to it. The first Mummy film is really a lot of fun if you discount the fact that Rachel Weisz's character is made to look like a complete idiot, but she's there were echoes of that character in the Jungle Cruise movie, in Emily Blunt's character.
Would you guys have accepted Brendan Fraser as Indiana Jones in the late 90s or the 90s, any time in the 90s?
He's so Canadian. I do think Brendan Fraser's really reinvented himself. I do think he is kicking ass on Doom Patrol, and it's great to see him again. He's also not making an action movie for a long, long time. If you've seen him, but yeah,
he's in the new Batgirl movie. He's playing Firefly. That's the rumor. He's Firefly.
It's interesting.
Yeah.
Well, he said that he physically had the crap beat out of him in the Mummy films that affected not only his health but his mental and his physical health. It was that bad.
Yeah,
him making those films, which is like, then you look again, you talk about Harrison Ford. How many times has he been injured? It seems like every time he does an Indiana Jones film, he gets hurt. He got freaking hurt on Force Awakens, as you mentioned.
Yep.
He gets hurt on every Indy film. It seems like something is always happening to Doom.
Yeah, Temple of Doom was shut down while he had back surgery.
Uh-huh.
And he was in the best shape of his life for that movie because that was the movie where he had his shirt off the most.
Yeah.
So even at
he's constantly crashing his plane.
And that's just on weekends.
The next thing, all these news stories have to dovetail with him crashing his plane into the set of the new Indiana Jones movie.
Yeah. That's how it opens.
This was not planned, folks. We just happened to capture it on film.
Yeah. It's funny because, like I said, Temple of Doom, he was in the best shape and he got the most hurt. As I turn middle age, I'm just seeing less and less reason to get in shape. I'm like, well, that happens when you get in shape. I was watching. Have you guys seen The Shrink Next Door on Apple TV?
Not yet. I mean, that's on my queue.
Really?
Is that really Paul Rudd and Will Ferrell?
Yeah. Paul Rudd and Will Ferrell, and they basically play like two Jewish guys from 30 to 70. But there was one scene where like Paul Rudd's his therapist, and he goes into a swimming pool and he takes his shirt off, and he looks kind of worse than me. And I yelled out loud, I'm like, he's Ant-Man right now. It was like, not only is that body unachievable by normal circumstances, you can't keep that when you're playing a superhero. 6 months later.
You don't keep it. Yeah. The moment you stop doing that crazy workout stuff, Chris Hemsworth has talked about it. It's like I forgot what movie. He went from one movie to another, and he said, now I'm going to do another Thor. I got to get back on this routine again so I can get back up to that type of shape again.
It's the reason you never saw Robert Downey Jr. without a jacket after Iron Man 3.
No.
Once he wasn't the star anymore, he wasn't going to do that workout.
No, I don't blame him.
Yeah.
And that's the funny thing too. Whenever it comes to the indie films, there's a trainer of Harrison Ford's trainer will go on YouTube to share some training routines. He goes, this is the routine that Harrison does when he's getting in shape for an Indiana Jones film. And he shows all these different routines. And just that was another thing that just came out recently. When we talk about it, Daniel Craig's trainer for all the Bond films is putting out a book talking about his workout routines for all the different stars that he worked with. One of them is Daniel Craig, and talk about how he helped Daniel Craig get into Bond shape, which is it's brutal. That kind of stuff is brutal.
I'm glad about that because when you said Daniel Craig's trainer is putting out a book, I was like, is the title Daniel Craig's a big dick and here's why? I was like, oh, but it's not that kind of book.
Tell all.
That's another connection between Indiana Jones and Bond. They used a lot of the same stuntmen.
Yes.
There's a lot of guys go back and forth.
They've had a lot of the same stuntmen, the same production crews. Of course, a lot of the Bond indie films, they use the same sets, or not the same sets, but they use the same sound stages.
Yeah.
They use the soundstage, Elstree Studios in London. Yes, you had a lot of the same guys. You've had a lot of the same camera crews, same DPs. Yeah, a lot of same guest stars. We've talked about this throughout the year. I would catch so and so who was was it A View to a Kill? The CIA agent?
David, yep. Yeah,
David,
from the Chinese CIA agent, yeah.
He's a Chinese CIA agent. He's Lo Han, Indy's sidekick in Temple of Doom, who doesn't make it out of Club Obi-Wan in the very beginning. And it's in the same year. He plays alongside both James Bond and Indiana Jones in the same year, which is, I'm like, I'm jealous of the dude. I'm like,
that screws up your taxes, though.
Yeah.
The next year is like, you didn't make a Bond film or an Indiana Jones film?
Oh, dude.
Now it's on BBC.
Same with John Rhys Davies. He's in The Living Daylights, and of course we know him for Sala in the indie films.
Yeah, and they said when he was Gimli, their favorite thing to do was he would go out with the hobbits. They'd all get drunk, and he'd tell them Raiders of the Lost Ark stories.
Oh, see, that sounds like fun.
Yeah. Oh God, it sounds like fun.
That sounds like a hell of a lot of fun.
And he was miserable on that set because he had an allergic reaction to the makeup. So he was in constant pain, and he still took the hobbits out to dinner to tell stories about this movie.
That's like when you have Roger Moore and Christopher Walken, hanging out while they're working on A View to a Kill. Yeah, let's go to a restaurant. Let's talk. Oh my God, would I have loved to sit at that table?
I would have waited at that table.
Oh. And then it was funny because I just saw Sum of All Fears, the Jack Ryan, what was supposed to be the reboot of the Jack Ryan series with Ben Affleck this time, which made me think all over again about Bond, about Indy, and about how difficult it is to create a character that you can keep going for so long that people accept. Bond.
You want to talk about rebooting a character. Yeah. I mean, Alec Baldwin was the first Jack Ryan.
Then you had Harrison Ford play him in 2 films. Mm-hmm. Then you had Ben Affleck, and then you had Chris Pine.
And then you had John Krasinski.
Then John Krasinski in the Amazon series. It's so difficult. You give credit to the Broccolis and Eon that they've been able to keep that character as consistent as they have. Unlike, we've been trying for the longest time to create an American Bond. The closest I say we've gotten is Batman. That to me is the closest.
Yeah.
almost the same character, but the same different actors can play him. We'll accept it. And in speaking to the whole bit about, Dave, you say you want the next Bond movie to kind of like be a standalone thing and go from there. You know how we're going to find out if that works or not? When the new Batman film, The Batman with Robert Pattinson, comes out. Because that's what I feel like that's what they're going for.
Yeah.
Well, they already said that's going to be a trilogy, I think.
But again, it's like, boom, we're taking this character and we're not going to worry about all the stuff that came before. We're just going to, boom.
They have the same problem that the Broccolis have now, is that they have to follow this epic that was a beginning, middle, and an end, that was modern, that was speaking to the same generation, and they have to figure out a way to do it again. And it seems like there's a lot of Nolan in this movie. I'm looking forward to it, but it's a thing when you're talking about reboots, about the one thing that Daniel Craig probably suffered from being a reboot was having to not only bring Bond back, but to touch all the tropes. It's like, oh, here's the Aston Martin. Oh, he's actually Blofeld. Oh, here's Spectre. And I don't think anything suffers from that as much as Batman does, because immediately in this movie, it's like, here's another Catwoman. Here's another Penguin. Here's another Riddler. Oh, who's the Joker going to be? Oh, but there was a Joker movie without Batman. And it's like, not only do you reboot Batman, but you reboot every single thing about Batman, to the point where it's like, well, do you even bother telling a new story? Or is it just like, here's the Joker again, but it's a slightly modernized plot? And that's what I worry about with Indy, is not only do you bring the character back, and you probably set him in the 30s again, but it's like, how soon would it be before they'd be like, oh, here's the new Belloc, and here's an Easter egg about the Ark, and here's a Marion, and then you just end up going through the cycles again. The one thing you can say about Marvel is, even when they brought back Spider-Man, and there's been 9 Spider-Man movies, they rebooted Spider-Man to be back in high school. They haven't done the same stuff. They brought out villains that we didn't see before. And when they repeated villains, they brought the same goddamn actors back. So like, I think we would have been disappointed if the first Marvel movie was the origin and the Green Goblin and throwing Gwen Stacy off a bridge. And it's just so hard not to do that. And I think not only do I not see it working rebooting Indy, I don't think they'd be able to resist the temptation to be like, and he's got a kid named Short Round who's helping him get the Ark, and his dad's along for the ride, and throw it all in one movie, just Easter egg after Easter egg after Easter egg.
And then you cast Pierce Brosnan as his dad.
Yeah.
I would like that. I'd like that.
That actually would be pretty cool.
Pierce Brosnan has that beard now.
Yeah.
I mean, but isn't that though like an American sensibility? Because you don't see, with all the Bond films, it's not like every time when they rebooted Bond, it's not like they said, okay, now we've got to get an Odd Job in there. We have to get all these things that people know from Bond films. They said, no, we're going to start over. We're going to do this. We're going to put a contemporary spin on it, and we're going to space it out over time. Have, as I say, give the stew time to cook.
Yeah, but they didn't do it. So it was like, okay, we got a Q in the third movie. We got an Aston Martin in the third movie. We had a Moneypenny right away. And we had a male M by the fourth movie. They did touch on those things. I mean, it certainly wasn't, it wasn't a nostalgia trip, and I think the Daniel Craig era is a great job. But the more you reboot these things, the harder it is to not just reboot all the key moments as well as the character.
Yeah.
You looked at I say, well, to me, I would say you can do the next Bond film like they did Never Say Never Again, where boom, it was essentially, it could have been a reboot because you recasted Q. You did all these things with the character. You recasted Leiter again, although they're always recasting Felix Leiter in every film. It didn't matter. And you just, I know the names. Oh, that is so cool. That's the take on it now. I got it. And they rolled with it. If there's anything about Never Say Never Again, even though it's not officially an Eon production, I would say if the Broccolis were smart, they should look at that film and emulate the stuff from that movie that worked.
They're never looking at that film. I bet they've never seen it.
I'm sure they've seen it, like dismissively. And then at one point,
No, I think they're proud they've never seen it. Like my girlfriend is very proud that she walked out of the Matrix. And I'm like, yeah, you could have walked out of any other Matrix. You should have sat through the first one.
But as an aside, since you bring it up, I do not understand the hate that the last Matrix movie is getting. I actually enjoyed it. I liked it better than the last two.
Oh God, yeah, I thought it was interesting, and I went back and watched the three again. It's like Pirates of the Caribbean. The first one is way better than you think it's going to be,
Right.
and it's that good every time. The second one's terrible, but it's got a couple of good action set pieces. The third one doesn't make any goddamn sense, and by the fourth one, no one knows why they made it. But the fourth one at least has some idea. The fourth one has some ideas to it, and they don't see them through, and they don't pay them off. But at least they're talking about more than the Matrix sequels did. And Matrix to me is also like Ghostbusters. One was really good. Like looking back, there was no reason to ever go back to those again and again and again, because they're never going to do it right.
At least with that cast. Oh. PM Paris, friend of the show, totally agrees with you on the whole thing. Oh, and shout out to Ms. Paris, who was the person who came up with the name for this particular show. Phoenix. She was one of several people on my Facebook page who came up with ideas on what to name this James Bond podcast, and it was between Shaken Not Heard and Blunderball. So
you never said Blunderball was on the table.
I love the Shaken Not Heard. Dave and I both agreed. Most people,
yeah.
Chris Ranji of formerly of The Score, when I asked him, does he want to be on this show? He went, yeah, great. He goes, your name's kind of brilliant. Yeah, the name's kind of brilliant. Anywho. Dave, John and I have kind of like been dominating this entire conversation as far as the relationship here goes. And I'm be honest, I wasn't entirely sure about how into indie you were as much as Bond. I mean, were there any things that you really noticed or things that were significant for you?
Well, I'm an Indiana Jones fan, obviously not on the same level as you. I've seen them all.
Dave, did you just say the Indiana Jonas Brothers?
Yes.
Because that's the name of our next podcast.
My name is Indiana Jonas. That's what it came from. The one thing that stood out to me as far as the similarities, and most of the stuff you touched on, like a different woman in each one, there's a lot of similar action scenes, big set pieces. I like and I think this happens in all four of them, where the movie begins sort of in the middle of an adventure, that's not necessarily always related to the larger plot, which is kind of something you see in some Bond movies. And obviously
the cold open. I mean,
the cold open. Yeah, you just start right. Yeah, there's no slow introduction. You jump right into the middle of the action.
Yeah, the only difference is the title is up front. They don't wait for the cold open to be over to go into the title. But it's the same structure. Yeah,
exactly. One thing that stood out to me in this could be totally a coincidence, in Temple of Doom, when they're having the big feast with the monkey brains. Now, that came out in 1984, correct?
Yeah.
Temple of Doom. The year before was Octopussy. By the way, shout out to Dr. P for this awesome Christmas gift. The Octopussy soundtrack on vinyl.
Oh,
the scene when Bond is doing having the feast or the dinner with Kamal Khan, the villain in that one, and it's a stuffed sheep's head.
Yeah.
They remove the top of the platter, and he gets this like look of like he's holding back vomit. It's like, huh. The very next year we get Temple of Doom, and it's a very similar type moment. So it could be totally a coincidence, but that was my immediate thought when that scene showed up.
Yeah, we also get not only do we get the cold open and everyone, but we go right from the cold open to the briefing. And except for
Yeah.
Temple of Doom, they all like Indy goes back to the college. You know, Raiders is probably the most famous briefing scene where he meets the government men, and they're for some reason they have to sit on the stage in the auditorium so they can get all the angles, and they explain to you everything about the arc and why you have to get it. And it happens again with the with Donovan in Last Crusade, telling him that his father's been kidnapped and he was going after the Grail. You know, and Crystal Skull, he's got the briefing from the military. You know, after he survives the refrigerator. Temple of Doom's the only one that doesn't, because they just kind of fall into the Indian adventure after the Hong Kong adventure. But that's all right from Bond. It's like they're basically going into M's office at that point.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
The boat chase scene in Last Crusade felt very much like the boat chase in From Russia with Love. You have Indy in a motorboat with a blonde, just like Bond in a motorboat with a blonde. And there's even some framing I was watching. They're going, oh my goodness, the framing looks the same. As Spielberg was lifting stuff from that and just pulling it over. So and of course it is in the Living Daylights, the scene when Bond and the cellist are sliding down the mountain in the giant cello case made me think of the escape from the plane that's, you know, a Lao Cheese plane that crashes into the mountain and they're going down Mount Hummel on the raft.
Yeah.
Again, the framing looks the same. If you go to the Shaken Not Heard Instagram page and go back a couple months, and you'll see I pull up some stills from both films and do comparisons so you can see how much they just seem to like. And I don't know if they're homages or they're just, again, coincidental. They said, oh, that worked for him. Let's do it here. You know,
I remember watching a Mythbusters where they did an Indiana Jones episode, and then they showed that you cannot do the raft thing because your weight will always flip it over and you just land on the mountain with a life raft on top of you, like a Wile E. Coyote stunt. And after that, I never watched Mythbusters ever again.
They do everything. Adam Savage did the bit with the swinging across a chasm with the whip. You know, see,
they try to hang a guy with a fan. They did that in that episode.
And of course, the worst myth bust they've done of all time was the if you shoot an oxygen tank, it will not explode and kill the shark at the end of Jaws. But even Spielberg himself knew that was contrived. He said, but you need the big explosive ending. Because in the movie, the shark is killed with a spear. I mean, I'm sorry, not in the movie. In the book, the shark is killed with a spear, and Spielberg decided to change it for a more literally explosive ending.
I will say, to give Mythbusters hope, they did prove that if you jump into a pool and someone shoots at you, you are safe because the bullets liquefy when they hit the water.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So I don't know how many times Bond did that, but
well, it's in the beginning of No Time to Die.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, then what if you are in a tank with a shark? Will the shark go by you, like in the tunnel, like it did in so many Bond films, where the shark decides not to eat him, but the guy behind him?
Depends on the shark.
Yeah. So I will say, you know, there's a future for Bond, I think. Definitely. If there's anything that there is a divergence between Bond and Indy, is that Bond, I think, is going to keep going. I am not quite so confident that Indiana Jones is going to keep going beyond Harrison Ford's last film. We might be saying, okay, this is our 5 series. Just like you're never going to see another Die Hard. You know, who else is going to play John McClane? No one wants anyone but Bruce Willis to play him. They will not accept anyone else playing the Terminator. They tried it. If it's not Schwarzenegger, it's not going to happen. I'm trying to think of who else.
They tried doing another Conan.
Yeah, Conan didn't work. Exactly. The Lethal Weapon movies. Yeah,
Did they reboot those?
they had a television series, and that didn't go anywhere. I don't even know the guy who did it. I mean, like, and then they even recast him in the series too.
Was he one of the Wayans brothers in that show?
Yeah, he was Murtaugh.
I remember they did a Midnight Run series with Chris McDonald as Robert De Niro. That didn't go anywhere.
No. So I guess you got to accept that there's some characters that they go so far and then they end. And as much as Hollywood or a movie studio wants to bring him back and set him up, it's just not going to happen. Bond, I'll give him credit. Bond is timeless. Bond will probably keep going,
Well, you can you could reverse the situation and ask, what if Connery had played Bond for like 30 years? Would audiences have accepted a different guy playing him after he left the role, or would they only say, okay, Connery? I mean, there's still people like my dad, rest in peace, would say, oh, Connery was the only James Bond, although he did like Daniel Craig. But within the first decade, they recast the character and they show that franchise, that character can have longevity for decades to come with different actors. But does it reach a point where one guy plays him for so long and becomes so the character becomes so synonymous with that one actor that, like it has, like we're talking about Indiana Jones, could you guys imagine Bond continuing if it was just one iconic actor who played him for like 30 years?
I mean, that makes me think of like Dracula, where you had Bela Lugosi did the first one, and then you had Christopher Lee doing this long, long run that people love. But and of course, Gary Oldman did it with Coppola, and Frank Langella did it, and there's been all of these
now we're getting Nicolas Cage as Dracula, which I'm so excited about.
Yeah. He already did a vampire movie in the 90s.
He did, yeah.
But but if you say Dracula, people picture Bela Lugosi.
Yeah.
So maybe it would have been like that, and Bela Lugosi only played Dracula twice. But sometimes it's that first stamp, and maybe that's part of why Connery is still known as Bond, because there have been some very good Bonds. I don't even know that I'd say Connery was the best. He's great, but because he was the first one, he left that stamp.
Yeah. He's probably, we've talked about this before. I'll acknowledge he's probably the best, but he's not my favorite. Like you can both, they're not, mutually exclusive thing where he was the original, he was the best, but if I'm ranking them by preference, he would not be my favorite. But I can also acknowledge he was probably the best.
Yeah.
Yeah.
PM Paris Phoenix says, I still get upset with Doctor Who changes.
Prepare to be upset.
Which is true. I mean, I've stopped watching the recent series, not so much because I don't care for Jodie Whittaker. I think she's great. Just I'm not crazy about the scripts and the stories and the overall production of it.
No, it's been really flat.
Yeah. So I mean, I guess that's another thing too. It's funny that with Doctor Who, though, it seems maybe it's because it's a British production. Again, Eon is a British company, and there's something about the way they go about these things. They're like, yeah, we just learn to accept it and we move on. Whereas Americans,
they keep calm and carry on.
Yeah, really. Us, we're like, no. I mean, what's this whole debate that when Chadwick Boseman passed away, that you can't recast T'Challa? And for the longest time, they're saying, no, you can't recast T'Challa. Only Chadwick Boseman can play Black Panther. And there would be a disrespect to him if you recast the character. And I was saying, don't get me wrong, I thought Chadwick Boseman was great. But if you're saying only one actor can play a character, that's a shame, because now you're never going to see the Black Panther in a movie again after this.
For that, I think we can have another Black Panther, and it doesn't have to be T'Challa.
I think that's what's going to happen in the new one.
Yeah.
It'll be a different character.
Because his father was the Black Panther, and they established that's a mantle you take on. And I'm fine with them not doing T'Challa again. Same way I'm fine with them not doing Indiana Jones again. But
that's us. See, again, that's an American thing. We're like, we get so attached to certain people playing certain characters that now we can't envision anyone else playing them. But now you look at something like Star Trek, where they've really loosened that up. We've now had 3 different people playing Kirk. Okay. No, I'm sorry, 2 people playing Chris Pine and William Shatner.
3 Spocks.
We've had
And
3
three-
people. Yeah,
and
3 people playing
Pikes.
Spock.
Yeah.
Two Kirks, 3 Spocks, and
we've
I
had-
know they're going to bring in another Kirk at some point.
We've had 4 people play Captain Pike, who was only in the goddamn pilot.
Right. So and it's getting audiences to accept that sort of thing again. It's getting them to accept it. We've talked about this before. If Dark Knight Rises doesn't do as well as it does, I mean, Dark Knight Rises is essentially No Time to Die, except without the character dying. But it's the end of that character. We're never seeing the Christian Bale Batman again. It's done. He said, "I'm done. I'm ending it here." And audiences are like, "Cool. We told a complete story arc. It's contained. Boom." And now we can have other guys play Batman, and it doesn't have to relate to that. There are things that you need to happen. You need it to happen that audiences accept it before you can do it elsewhere, I guess, is what I'm thinking, at least with American audiences.
Yeah.
It's annoying as fuck, though, because I would like to see more of other things. Although now that you think about it, who else can play Jason Bourne besides Matt Damon now? You know,
Didn't Jeremy Renner play him? Or did he play another guy?
No, yeah, he played another guy.
Okay.
And then he did, but now Jeremy Renner's like Hawkeye, and it's that he brought his Bourne Identity stuff into that Hawkeye series. So,
and another one we were talking about, wanting actor playing a character for decades. Tom Cruise, Mission Impossible.
Yes, and they've been talking.
Then again, he's playing a character that was from a '60s television show.
Yeah.
Well, that's like saying Michael Keaton is the only Batman after Adam West already was.
Right.
Yeah.
And they've been talking about that being that's the thing about the Mission Impossible franchise, that it was supposed to be something that could go on without, Tom Cruise, but no one wants to see it unless he's in it.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, all right, okay, so what do you do from there?
Yeah.
Remember, the selling point was you would have a different director do every Mission Impossible one. The first one was Brian De Palma, and then John Woo did Mission Impossible 2. So it's like getting all these different visionary directors to put their spin on it. I think the John Woo one's probably my favorite to date of all the MI movies. So, but it's become a Tom Cruise thing, because now it's just Chris McQuarrie cranking out every Mission Impossible movie after that, and casting Jack Donaghy. So
didn't Ron Moore and Brendan Braga write one of them?
Early on, I think so. Yeah.
Yeah. So
J.J. Abrams did the third one, right?
J.J. Abrams directed the third one. Yes.
Yeah.
And then Brad Bird did the fourth one.
Yeah.
Again, it's trying to get different cool directors to put their bit on it. Oh, okay. Phoenix yet again chiming in. How about Mark Wahlberg as Bourne in the LOL?
Mark Wahlberg's in Uncharted.
Uncharted, yeah.
On Sully in Uncharted. So he's already moved into the mentor role.
Well, but yeah, he's getting all long in the tooth. He doesn't want to do the stuff where he's getting beat up so much anymore. All right. Well, those are all questions. I guess the fun little exploration here. Instead of hitting on all the obvious things between Indy and James Bond, we've got the differences and I think the expectations, the different expectations that audiences have of them. And we'll see. Curious to see what happens with Indy 5. Curious to see what happens with the recasting of Bond, what the future holds for each of the characters, what Disney is going to do with the IP for Indiana Jones. We'll see. And I'm amused as hell that suddenly everybody loves Andrew Garfield as Spider-Man.
Yeah,
poor
seriously.
Andrew Garfield. How could people have been treating him like this? We always loved him. Why did the studios do Andrew Garfield like that? Okay, I call bullshit on all of you.
To bring it back to Bond, I've said it before and I've said it again on this show. Andrew Garfield is the Pierce Brosnan of Spider-Man. Perfect for the role, given terrible scripts.
Terrible scripts. But guess what, folks? When it comes to that type of discussion, a more appropriate discussion when it comes to the Marvel movies, the crew that you see here now, myself, Dave Pinto, and John Clark, are all going to be part of our new podcast in 2022, the MCU Review. Next week, Monday, January 17th, will be the very first episode of the MCU Review, where we will be going through, like we did with the Bond movies, we're going to go through every Marvel Cinematic Universe film in order of release. Again, in order of release. So we're going to start with Iron Man and work our way through. And we're going to have not only us, but we're going to have a guest on from different areas of entertainment and media to also give their perspective on the films. We're going to follow the same formula that we did with the Shaken Not Heard. Folks that have seen the movies in the past are going to watch them again before coming on the show. We're going to compare and contrast how we felt about the film from the first time we saw it to the most recent time we've seen it, and give our opinions going forward. So the next movie is going to be Iron Man. It's going to be myself, John, and Dave, and we're going to be joined by my old editor from the Chicago Red-Eye, Brian Moore. He's going to be our first guest. Poor guy is actually, this is the fun part, he's a huge Star Wars fan. He and I would talk Star Wars all the time when I was with Red-Eye. But this time he had never seen any of the Marvel movies, none of them. He just recently started watching the Marvel films with his kids, who are pretty much locked in right now because the schools are locked out again because of COVID. So he's been watching them. He told me he was impressed so far. He has not seen. We'll talk about Iron Man, but I think right after Iron Man, it's Incredible Hulk, which is not on Disney Plus. So we're going.
Is that anywhere streaming?
Not on a paid service. You got to rent.
It's a Universal film, so if anybody would have it, it would be Peacock. But I don't think they do.
They don't.
You can purchase it. It comes up on sale for $5 very often.
Yeah. So that's the MCU Review debuting next week, and in this time slot, what we're going to be doing is alternating Shaken Not Heard and MCU Review. So this. Both and the MCU Review, not only will it be here on our Facebook page, on our YouTube page and our Twitch page, but will also be broadcast as a podcast on the Radio Misfits Podcast Network. So if you can't catch us on the live stream or watch the videos, you will be able to listen to us on Radio Misfits. Something that we've been wanting to do for a long time, but now that I got John on board, I'm just going to give him the audio file and you deal with it.
Yeah, no, it gives us a time off because thanks to you, Elliot, Caffeinated Comics has been part of the Radio Misfits Podcast Network for 5 years now. So these MCU Review episodes will air as part of Caffeinated Comics. We talked about it being its own separate audio podcast, but to kind of pair up with what we're already doing, which is talking a lot about Marvel and DC every other week, since you'll be alternating with Shaken Not Heard. We'll be alternating the MCU Review as an audio podcast, and then in the weeks in between, we'll still be covering all the news that's fit to geek.
So it should be fun. We'll see how that goes. And then if for folks, just so you know, if you've never listened to Caffeinated Comics in the past, I've done several episodes with John and his co-host Stephen Brown. So easy to catch stuff on the Radio Misfits Podcast Network. Just tell your smart speaker, play the Caffeinated Comics podcast, and you'll get the latest episode.
And Dave was on not too long ago, so you can hear us talk more about Bond.
Talking about James Bond. We will continue the James Bond discussion, though, just so you know. Next time, because next week is MCU Review. The following week, we're going to be talking about the Bond girls, or was it the Bond drinks? It was one of those. But we have different.
They're the same.
Really. We're talking about the Women of Bond, different featured drinks. We're going to be having the theme songs, James Bond theme songs. We're also going to have in March 2 tournament, March Madness. We're going to celebrate March Madness with 2 tournaments, being the best Bond girls, the tournament of Bond women, and the tournament of Bond henchmen, the bad guys. So it'll be March Madness. And so it'll be fun. We want you to check out the Facebook page where you can vote on which Bond girls you think were the best, which Bond villains do you think were the worst, and keep the conversation going. We are also looking forward to the release of the Spectre board game from Morpheus Games. They're releasing a Spectre board game where you play the role of Blofeld and try to thwart Bond, keep Bond from thwarting you. We'll be looking at that. And, of course, the different Bond comic books, which, let me acknowledge, you can't see this on the podcast, folks, but if you're watching us in the live stream, my Shaken Not Heard co-host got me a bunch of out-of-print Bond comic books. The Dark Horse books, as well as, I want to say these are the Comico. Oh, no, there's Dark Horse. Yeah. James Bond's Serpent's Tooth and Permission to Die. Permission to Die, written and drawn by Mike Grell. Of course, one of my favorites. He would, of course, most folks know him for Warlord, Green Arrow, and John Sable Freelance. And Paul Galassi and Doug Mensch, working on a James Bond miniseries, Serpent's Tooth. If any comic team was meant to do a James Bond comic, it's this duo right here. So
Serpent's Tooth is so ridiculous it makes Moonraker look like From Russia with Love. So you're in for a treat with that one.
Oh, hell yeah.
And my podcast co-host very generously treated me to the physical copy of the Shaken cookbook, cocktail book, which I foolishly gave away as a wedding gift a couple years ago. And, it's one thing to have it in your Amazon Kindle, but it's one thing to have flip through the book, see all the nice glossy photos and everything. So thank you again for that.
When you told me you no longer had the book because you gave it away, I'm like, that's a wrong that must be righted. We need to fix that. So, of course, folks, you can always email us at shakennotheard@gmail.com. Check out our Instagram, instagram.com/shakennotheard. You can watch all the episodes of our show on youtube.com/c/shakennotheard. Of course, unless you're watching us here on the Facebook page. We are also on Twitch, where you can watch us live. I am going to this is a quick I'm going to tell you, easiest contest ever. I have to celebrate this episode and the start of 2022. I have a Blu-ray copy, an actual brand new Blu-ray copy of Raiders of the Lost Ark, the first and best Indiana Jones film. I am going to send that to the person who writes to me at shakennotheard@gmail.com and tell me what was Indiana Jones's original name supposed to be. I talked about that at the top of the hour, at the top of the show. If you remember, what was his name? If more than one person writes in and answers with the correct answer, I'll enter you into a random drawing. But between now, I'll say between now and next week, you have a chance to enter what was Indiana Jones's original name supposed to be before it was actually turned to Jones, something else. Write to us with the answer at shakennotheard@gmail.com. If all correct answers will go into a random drawing, the winner will get a copy, a hand copy, a real, none of this digital stuff that I've been giving away. This is for real. And if you don't win, by the way, I will give two runner-ups copies of Trigger Mortis, the James Bond novel written by Anthony Horowitz, but that will be for your Amazon Kindle. So we'll have 3 prizes: either an actual Blu-ray disc of Indiana Jones, Raiders of the Lost Ark, or a digital copy of Trigger Mortis. Just write to us again at shakennotheard@gmail.com. What was Indiana Jones supposed to be called before they changed it? All right. Before we go, any last thoughts, Dave?
No, we were talking about Bond actors who later appeared in Indiana Jones movies or appeared in Bond before Indiana Jones. We also have in the forthcoming film Mads Mikkelsen, aka Le Chiffre.
Mm-hmm.
So there's that as well.
Mads Mikkelsen is in every franchise now. He's like the Christopher Lee of the new millennium. He was in Doctor Strange. He was in Rogue One. He's in Indiana Jones, and he was in Casino Royale. What's left?
Yeah, something DC related.
Yeah.
That's all. Yeah, right. Well, you did have Harrison.
He would be a great Ra's al Ghul if they were to bring him.
Yeah.
Yes.
That new tone they're going for.
Yeah.
Nice call.
You got to think about that for the next Batman movie. Yeah. You did have Harrison Ford and Daniel Craig team up in Cowboys and Aliens, so you had that together. But it wouldn't be the first time Harrison Ford would meet it. But of course, Harrison Ford and Sean Connery. He's teamed up with 2 Bonds so far.
Yep.
All right. Yeah. So a lot of great overlap. I saw a bunch of Bond folks in the Alex Rider series on IMDb. A bunch of former actors who played Bond villains. I mentioned the Sum of All Fears, the Jack Ryan reboot. I saw a bunch of Bond actors appearing in that. They're everywhere. That is a gig. If you can get that kind of gig, that I want to be that guy. I never want to be like the star of a film, but I want to be that character guy who's always in the background. Like, they'll go, "Oh, wait, you were that guy. You were there." Yeah, oh yeah, I got blown up in this movie with Harrison Ford. And I got outed as a double agent in this movie, with Daniel Craig. I'm that guy who you always see in all these films. So I wouldn't mind that. It's good work if you can get it. All right, and again next week the MCU review, same bat time, same bat channel. Well, different channel. Want to go to MCU review, our Facebook page, our YouTube page, and our Twitch page. And then we'll have some fun there. All right, everyone. John, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Dave, as always, thanks for coming along on this crazy little adventure. We're going for another year. I think we're going to do it. Think we can make it?
Yeah.
It should be fun. I mapped it out. I've already mapped it out. It's going to take us till March to get through phase 1 of the Marvel Universe movies. So we'll go. And there are a lot of fun folks want to be in on this one. So this is going to be fun too. And we'll see what brings us. So until next time, everyone, I'm Elliot Serrano for Dave Pinto and John Clark. This has been Shaken Not Heard, the James Bond fan cast that no one listens to. Take care, everyone. Be good. And we hope you had a happy new year.